Good morning, everyone.
Yes.
We'll just give folks a second here to get out of the waiting room and into this virtual room here. Folks can get their cup of coffee ready. Should be a fun conversation this morning. Welcome, welcome. Everybody, thanks, Nick.
I admit I'm drinking tea.
That's all right.
Okay.
I'm still allowed here if I'm drinking tea, right?
It is. We really love alliteration, coffee and conversations at the Carsey School.
Of course.
But we allow any beverage that folks want to drink within reason, obviously, if it's allowed wherever
it is
you are.
8:15. It is 8:15 on the East Coast, anyway.
Right. Yeah, really on the West Coast.
Oof.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
All right. Well, folks are going to start coming in here, but we'll kind of get this thing kicked off. I'll give an introduction here. Welcome everyone to our October edition of Coffee and Conversations. We're so glad to have you all here with us. Coffee and Conversations, it's a joint effort of the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Bureau of Education and Training, and the New Hampshire Municipal Managers Association. So glad to see you all here. Nick is putting some information and links in the chat, including the fact that we are extremely happy to have an all-star panel this morning to talk about public education, public administration education in these kind of polarized times. And so very happy to be joined by Dr. Dan Bromberg from the Carsey School, our Director of Academic Programs, Dr. Mercedes Hunt, who is a Senior Lecturer and Director of Undergraduate Business Programs at Granite State College, Dr. Christian Lagarde, who's a Senior Lecturer at Granite State College, and Dennis Martino, who's Master's of Education, also of Granite State College and formerly head of the New Hampshire Bureau of Education and Training. Great partners all the way around. So thrilled to have you all here. This is going to be a panel style discussion. And so I think the first thing we'd like to do is just have folks go around, introduce themselves, give some kind of background on what you do and what your role is in delivering public administration education. And so I'll just kind of go in the order that you all appear on my screen. And so Christian, we'll start with you.
Great. Thanks, Jordan. Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Lagarde. As Jordan said, I'm a Senior Lecturer at Granite State in the Business Management and Finance Center and Division. My coffee of choice today is a New Orleans cold brew with almond milk, and great to be here. Great to talk about our program and our new program. So more on that shortly. Next, I think next to me is Daniel.
Hey, everyone. How's it going? My name is Dan Bromberg. As Jordan said, I'm the Director of Academic Programs for the Carsey School. Just a little bit about myself. So my degree's in public administration, and I have an appointment both in political science and in the Carsey School. And ultimately, the Carsey School, we have an MPA degree, but we also have two other degrees. We have a Master's of Community Development, Master's of Public Policy. And I really like to think of the suite of those degrees as how we deliver our public service education. I think today we'll probably focus on the public administration side of the shop, but happy to discuss all of those.
Awesome. Mercedes?
Hi, my name is Mercedes Hunt. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Business Management and Finance Programs. That's the full title at Granite State. And a Senior Lecturer. However, I don't teach as much as I do the administrative pieces. And as a part of this, I oversee about 10 different bachelor's programs, public administration being one, that we have worked very, very hard on over the last couple of years to enhance. Fire service administration is also one, which has to do with public administration. And I actually got my doctorate in parks, recreation, and tourism. And on the parks side of things and recreation side of things, public administration is a huge piece of that. And so it's all interrelated, I guess you could say. So I feel like I definitely have a vested stake in the conversation, and I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Dennis.
Well, thank you, Jordan. And it's great to see everybody here. We have so many interconnections because I've been an adjunct at Granite State for about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years anyway, at least. And right this moment, I'm teaching an undergrad class called Introduction to Public Administration. And it's been a joy. I've got some really interesting people, state troopers, fire service people, just a great bunch and very, very interactive. As you mentioned, I'm with the Bureau of Education and Training. At one time, I was the bureau chief, and now I retired from that job. And of course, we have, as many of you know, in New Hampshire, we have an ankle bracelet program where you don't really slip out the door, right? So I've been around for since about 2002, involved with the Bureau of Education and Training. And our perspective, we run the Certified Public Manager program, which is sort of, I don't want to use the word mechanical parts, but we're talking with all of these educators who bring in theory and practice. Whereas most of the people who get promoted in public service are experts at something, and they have no background in administration or public administration. And so we try to prepare people who might be, might have been a terrific nurse and was made head nurse of a hospital. We try to provide them with some management training so that they can get up to speed, because it's not just in public service. Across the nation, we tend to promote people because they're good at something and then promote them out of their skill set. And so that's why continuing ed is really important.
Thanks, Dennis. So we're going to go through now, and I just also want to say for folks in the audience, if you have any questions that come up, please use the Q&A box to put those questions in, and we'll filter them in real time as we're doing this panel style. So what I'd like to start with now is a little bit of an overview of what public education looks like in your programs and for your students. And we've got folks, at the undergraduate level, at the graduate level, at the continuing education level. And I'd assume that the process looks similar in some ways and different in some others. So I'd like to hear from each of you what kinds of content are covered, what are your programs and students like, and maybe how they come to your programs, and then what career paths could come out of each of the programs that you provide. Maybe we'll go in reverse order this time. How about? So Dennis, we'll start with you.
You have to repeat the question.
Yeah, of course. So what does public administration education look like for your students?
All right. For the kind of training that we do with the Bureau of Education and Training, we're really doing some nuts and bolts things. We start with sort of basic supervisory skills, that sort of interpersonal kinds of skills, having difficult discussions, all of the doing appropriate evaluations, and, being a mentor, all of those kinds of things. And then it slowly transitions from those interpersonal skills to systems kinds of issues. So we do classes on strategic planning and change management, and they're practical in the sense that it's pretty hands-on kinds of workshops and written assignments, etc. And so we've one of the things that we started doing because we think it's important given our demographics is we've started really incorporating knowledge transfer and management into our program so that people learn how to actually catalog what it is that they do, find out who knows what and where are they, and figure out plans for how do you transfer this when somebody leaves. And when we first started doing that, I wasn't skeptical. I knew it was important. I knew it was important. I didn't realize how much the students immediately grasped that this is important. If I leave tomorrow, what does somebody who fills in for me need to know? And I don't mean the job description. They can read a job description. It's like, who are my contacts? Do I have to contact Mercedes about anything, or Dan or Christian? And what would I contact them about? What's our connection? And so that's been there. We like to think that these are practical skills. They tend to be less theoretical on the training side. You know, I look at training as preparing somebody to do certain things well, as opposed to giving them a body of knowledge. It's like, okay, how do I do this? I have the background and the knowledge and the theory and all of that, but they're sort of the mechanics of it. So that's where we focus our attention.
Thanks, Dennis. Mercedes.
In the backwards order. So, and Christian, pipe in here too. So, I mean, we take a similar approach. You know, it's about a combination of skills building, leadership building, and then just knowledge building in the field. So our program, which we just did a program review over the course of this last year, we completely redid the public administration program. We actually changed the name of it from public service management to public administration to be more in alignment with industry standards. And the program itself, you know, they have to take a leadership class. They have a choice between volunteer management, essentially volunteer leadership, and strategic communication, where they would be like in front of the press, depending on kind of what a person's needs are. They take, you know, introduction to public administration. They take a public policy development and implementation course so that they can at least learn. We recognize that bachelor students are not going to create policy, but they likely are going to need to read policy, understand the process of creation of policy. And then from there, they take a class in human resource management, specifically for the public sector, because that's pretty unique. Budgets and finance, specific to the public sector, because that's also very unique. And so we're really trying to focus on aspects of the public sector that are different from the private sector or even nonprofit sector, because many times the two are lumped together, and we've really taken them apart in our program. And then giving them just the tools, knowledge, and know-how to do the management piece, which is a huge piece of this within administration. Christian, did I cover it?
Yeah, no, you got it all. And I know I gave a little sneak peek in my intro about our program review. We're going to be diving into it. Yeah, everything Mercedes just mentioned was some of the tweaks and changes that public service management degree, which is why it ended up in our camp, because it was a focus on management, and it was more of a business degree than a public service management degree or public service style degree. So you'll see when we talk about the program review, the tweaks and changes that we made it much stronger, much more robust, and much more focused on the public administration side of the house. And yeah, all the courses you just mentioned, Mercedes, definitely touch on it. The only one I think you missed was the fundraising and resource development, because of that component of public administration with grant management and grant funding and those types of things. We felt that needed to be in the program. What I didn't mention in my intro was that right before I took this job, I worked in DC for 6 years as a federal contractor for the Department of Labor, essentially managing big federal grants, some up into the $2 billion range. And that is definitely something that we wanted to embed into the program, is that understanding of resource development and grant writing and those kind of things.
Thank you both. Yeah, those are great critical foundational skills. Dan, can you talk a little bit about Carsey's programs?
Yeah, sure. I'd also talk kind of about my approach and how we kind of address, I think, all of these issues. So first, when you're thinking about a public administration degree, an MPA, or even an undergraduate degree potentially, the way that I like to frame this is we're talking about organizations that are typically mission driven, and they operate within a heightened political environment, right? So you have these two very distinct environmental characteristics that change them from running a for-profit entity. So, your outcomes are what have to drive some behavior, right? That mission, whatever that mission is. And you have to be able to motivate your employees to then fulfill that mission. And you can't necessarily do that through just giving them more money, because typically that's not, A, it may not incentivize them, and B, it may not be there, to even give them in the first place. So both of those characteristics kind of form the guardrails of what I would say this field is about. And then I'd say our role at the Carsey School is really combining some of the aspects that everyone was talking about with those management and leadership skills, but coupled with theory. And that doesn't mean that it's overwhelmingly theoretical. I don't think that's the case at all. But rather, right, there's this combination that we tend to call praxis, right? The combination of practice and theory smushed together. So the beauty of this is that happens in the classroom on a regular basis. So frequently our students, are folks that are running public organizations, right? So I might have a fire chief in my class. I'm certainly not going to walk in and tell that fire chief how to run their operation, but I will work with that fire chief to identify some of the founding theories upon which they manage with. So really, it's the approach of bringing those two things together. I think we see our roles really as facilitators more than anything else, right? We have kind of this extremely rich expertise that's in the classroom, throughout all of our students. So our job is to pull out that expertise, connect it to some of that content where I'm an expert, say, right? I'm an expert in theory, I would say, and really bringing together that combination of expert in practice, expert in theory. What does that mean when we're going out into the world and doing our jobs? I think a couple other pieces I'll just hit on super quick as far as how we do this. First, I'd say we acknowledge history. I think history is a really important path that gets us to where we are. So kind of whether it's past dependency or not, right? But we have to learn from the past. We have to learn from the field. So there is a historical overview of the field and how we got to where we are today. And then last, just from a really technical side, at this point, we offer both an executive program for those that have a bit more experience, and we offer, a program for those that are kind of coming into the field new. So more of a traditional program. Both of them are offered online, and we really do try to meet students where they are. So this program is accessible, to all of our students that are interested in pursuing this career. Certainly, it's a field that needs a lot of energy and a lot of new talent coming in as we see kind of generations shifting on.
One thing, Jordan, I want to mention, and it's something that Mercedes and I and Dennis and I have even talked about too. And it's something you said, Dennis, just sort of triggered this in my mind, is about sort of like our students. Dennis is right. Even in his intro to public administration class, the likelihood of having someone who's in the field already is very high. That's just inherent to a Granite State College student, that they are bringing this. So it doesn't matter what field they're coming in on all of our disciplines. Mercedes, when I think about like marketing or whatever, they're coming with some already. They're a practitioner already, so they're coming with that knowledge baked in. And then to your point, Daniel, so now they're learning a little bit more about the theory, and now they're learning more about the history of the intricacies of it, things that they may not even understand because they've been in that work world for 15 years in public administration. Now all of a sudden they're getting a little bit of deeper understanding on the academic side of the house. So I know Dennis and I have talked about this before, just the level of the type of student and what they bring to the classroom is super, and it just really enhances the learning. And that's another reason why I really love our new program, because if that is the case, and as Dennis was saying about if there's a fire chief in the class or someone who works for the city government already or whatever, the type of conversations that they're going to have in that class is just going to escalate beyond belief, and they'll be ready potentially for an MBA with Daniel. So we'll get into that later. But something you mentioned, Daniel, just made me think about like how we position our programs and our courses because we know that there's a high level of understanding that students are already in that field that they're coming to get to finish their education.
But then consequently, this is one of our great challenges too, which we I think is worth mentioning. And I'm sorry I cut you off, Dennis, because I see your hand now. But essentially, when we did this review of programs that are out there, we came to realize like the community colleges in New Hampshire are not offering this. And so when we started to think about our target market, we realized our target market ends up actually being people who are already working in the field, as opposed to people who are planning to work in the field in, you know, as a plan in perhaps earlier in their career. It tends to be, I think, for the majority of people, outside of maybe fire service, because I think that's kind of a unique one. A lot of people plan that very early on. But for others that we've seen in our program, I think people kind of just end up falling into it, which is something that I feel like is actually a challenge that we face, that there needs to be more people waving the flag of importance for getting bachelor's level foundational knowledge that is very intentionally scaffolded into the MPA program. But we very, very consciously planned our program to scaffold directly into the MPA so that when students decided to go for their master's, they would be prepared. Our students are going to come into an MPA probably with a very different foundation of knowledge than a student who studied anything else, right? Because I assume that people can study many things going into the MPA. I don't know your specific eligibility requirements, but and I think that this is a challenge that we face, and certainly something that's talk about fodder to be able to contemplate moving forward as public administration, the public service professionals. How do we hit people earlier on in their career and have them make this a choice, a lifelong career choice, as opposed to just having people kind of fall in and then get their education afterwards?
I was just trying to mention something about what Christian and Dan were, while they were describing a few things. I don't know about everybody else, but I know that Dan and I are members of the American Society for Public Administration. And we use a term, they are called pracademics. So I'm a practitioner, but I'm an academic, you know, that sort of thing. And, you know, Christian, with his background with all the grant work that you were doing for DOL and stuff, that's just you're the poster child for the pracademic in that case, right? And the other thing that I wanted to mention is on the training level of the public manager program, there are 40 accredited programs around that are part of the family of CPMs around the country. One of them actually is in the Netherlands, and they service the entire EU, and they do it through short residencies and do all their training in English because they have people from Spain and France and Germany and what have you. But I asked one of our colleagues to join us today, and I saw that he's in here. Brian Remmer is from the Vermont CPM program, and you know, we're sort of those twin states that look upside down at one another. And I know that on some level, I guess my broader point is we're kind of a community. You know, we have a lot of different connections. People who go through our state training program, we have credit agreements for undergrad credit at Granite State. We have a credit agreement with the MPA program at UNH for people who go through our CPM program. So they go through and they can, you know, enroll in one of the programs and have some work and money that they don't have to put up with, right? Or they don't have to invest in. And that's been a real draw. We've had an awful lot of people that have gone from our program into and gone to Granite State. We have one that's actually working there part-time right now, who went through our program and then finished his undergraduate degree there. And it's the interconnection of this community of like-minded people. When I say like-minded, I don't want to give the impression that we all think alike. That would be, if we all did, that would be a frightening thing. If we're talking about polarized times right now, I think one of the things that I have found is if you feel strongly about what's going on in our country these days, which there aren't many neutral people, it takes all the patience in the world on either side of that spectrum to try to find a way to communicate well. And I think that as academics, that's one of the things that if I had a magic wand and I could find the key to it, trying to create reasonable dialogue amongst people who don't think alike would be the best thing we could provide.
Yeah, Dan?
Yeah, let me just jump in quickly with just a few points. So I think everything that all of our panelists are hitting on, are just super important points as far as this community, this idea of students coming in with experience, right? All of these things. Just quickly, I want to mention one other program that isn't represented here. That's a public service nonprofit leadership program at UNH Manchester. Also, part of this community and doing really great work. A lot of experiential learning opportunities, just really great work coming out of UNHM there. And that also has a pathway into the MPA program at Carsey. So just acknowledging that out there. So a couple other points that came up. So this idea of students coming in with experience is, and to Mercedes' point, that sometimes people fall into this career, right? So what ends up happening is these students, they might just fall into this career and do this for 10 or 15 years, never having given it second thought at the bachelor's level of education. And, they've learned so much over their years of experience. So I think, Mercedes, you had mentioned, you don't exactly know what Carsey School requires, but to some degree, right, if someone has 15 or 20 years of experience, that bachelor's degree isn't what we're looking at, right? I mean, that's not the key. But to build this in at the bachelor's level and then, build that traction into either a master's or into, a career for a little bit and then back into a master's or whatever that combination is, really can provide a foundation that just, typically doesn't exist. And we ask important questions. And I think that's the key to part of this education. How much discretion should public managers have when they're implementing, programs? What's the accountability system that's in place when they're implementing public programs? Remember, and this isn't, a negative thing, but remember, career officials are non-elected public officials, and they're implementing a huge amount of government policy. So there are these questions that our students, in their day-to-day they're dealing with, but in their day-to-day, they don't have time to stop and reflect on this, right? Because they are constantly going, right? They're working, long days, hard days. Think about this pandemic, right? You're a police officer, you didn't have off, right? A lot of people got to work remotely. That didn't happen for, our police officers. And any number of our public servants, they didn't get to take off and work remotely. They had jobs to do. So I think part of what we're able to do in these programs is create space and time for our students to reflect on their practice and draw connections to their practice. And that's essential for any workplace, but I would argue, even more so for those that are in such essential positions across our, our states, our local governments, our, federal government, et cetera.
And yeah, to Daniel's point, right? Thinking about the pandemic, right? Essential workers, number one, were hospital workers. Who's this number two? Essential workers, public servants going back to City Hall or going back to what. So yeah, they were essential worker right after hospitals and such, even before teachers and things like that. So no, that's a perfect point, Daniel, about sort of like head focused and moving as quickly as possible. Jordan, I wanted to kind of answer Sharon's question about.
Yeah, can I, Christian? Let me segue here because I think this is a good time. So we can see the question, but the folks watching can't see it yet. So I'm gonna I'll read it out here. So Sharon has a question for us, kind of along these lines. She says, "Praxis is a term used a lot in education. The example she gives is credentialing for educators. Are there components?" So here's the question. Are there components of lifelong learning within this field? And are there opportunities for professional development post-formal degree program? And so Christian, if you want to kick us off.
I'll start it. I don't have an answer, but I will say this. So I will say what Mercedes and I have done when we've done a litany of program reviews and thinking about our curriculum is look at embedding industry certifications into the program. It's super important. They're industry recognized. The reason why industry validation, they may have these credentials for things like that. So if it's for business, if it's for marketing, if it's for management, if it's whatever. So we did, and Daniel, I'm looking at you on this one. We sort of scoured a little the world a little bit, looking for an industry certification for public administration. We didn't find one, so there wasn't anything we could add to the program.
Like bachelor's level.
At the bachelor's level, that we could embed or add to the program like we could for entrepreneurship or like we could for marketing. So yeah, Daniel, do you know of any industry certification or some sort of credentialing for public administration that's out there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, CPM is probably the closest thing we have to an industry quote unquote certification. So, kind of Dennis's shop. And as Dennis mentioned, right, there is a national board that governs this. There are really strict kind of accreditation standards associated with that. So certainly the CPM, as far as at that level where it's a non-degree certification. I'll mention a couple other things to answer Sharon's question as far as advanced beyond kind of bachelor's and master's degrees. Dennis mentioned the American Society for Public Administration. There are loads of opportunities through ASPA for further channeling your skill sets, further education. There are both regional and national conferences. So we hosted a regional conference in Portsmouth a few years back. Frequently conferences in Boston. The one this year is actually in Albany. So ASPA is a great, thanks Christian for putting it up there. ASPA is a great organization to get engaged with that. There's also NASPA, which is the National Association of Schools of Public Affairs and Public Policy, essentially. And they're the accrediting body for these schools and these programs. So yes, Sharon, there are these opportunities that exist outside of the degree programs. They're not necessarily codified as they are in other industries. I think, Christian, as you're kind of noting, it's not as if there's a whole set of credentialing. When you get to the field specific things, you'll see more, right? So obviously for fire service, there's something, right? For police, for public health. But in general, for that public management, I would definitely say CPM is kind of the main area that we would do that.
That's one of the ones we found, Daniel. We found one that was a public works certification, but it just didn't fit. I mean, it's great for the ones that for the industry that you just mentioned, but it really didn't fit in our curriculum. But yeah, that one for public works was out there. So they're there, just not specific to our lane of public administration.
I'd like to add that there are some kinds of things to answer Sharon's question. There are some workshops that are very specific for topically for people in public administration. So for example, the Bureau of Education and Training, which provides the CPM program here in New Hampshire, we offer other kinds of classes. We offer professional development workshops, et cetera. And one that's become very popular is managing in a union environment. I did 21 years working for a labor union doing contract negotiations and advocacy work. And I know that the average person who gets put into a management situation it's like walking through the forest blindfolded. They bump into every tree. And so what we try to do with this workshop is provide them with, not an extensive background, but enough to keep you out of trouble, follow the rules, follow the laws, and be effective in getting supervision and management accomplished properly, and actually on some level you're raising the level of I don't know, camaraderie. If management and labor work as a team, people want to go to work there and they're productive. It's hard to do, but it's worth doing. And so we offer some things like that. We offer some classes that are very, very specific to certain situations. We conduct one on conducting public meetings, and that's been something, in the state of New Hampshire. If you went to talk to our Department of Transportation, they're always having public sessions where they're hearing about right-of-way and this, that, and the other thing. Environmental services, they have more groups that they meet with on a regular basis that are whether it's about wetlands or whatever, and they're constantly out in the field. And so we try to do it like soup to nuts, like, all right, how do you get the people out to the meeting? And then how do you conduct the meeting? And how do you follow up with the meeting? And in addition to that, we add something about the statutes that that govern municipal meetings, and how quickly minutes must be available, et cetera, et cetera. Because they seem like minor things, but if you had no knowledge of them, you could step on a landmine, And so those kinds of things I think are helpful to people in public service, but they're not necessarily part of our CPM program. They're sort of more of a micro focus on certain things. So
thanks, Dennis. Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. I mean, certainly, those are things people need to know in the public sector.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of cool continuing education programs for folks in the field as they continue on in their careers, as they need specific skills. We have another question here from an anonymous attendee, kind of on the other side of things. And this person asks, how do you support students that may not have much professional experience prior to starting the program? So you've got folks coming in, 15, 20 years of experience, they're already a manager, they're already a police officer, a fire chief, or whatever the case may be. Let's say you have a student coming in from another degree program, or or they're at the bachelor's level. How do you support those students?
I'll take this one. So, we do have students who, while Granite State College tends to, our average student age is around 34, 35. We do have some more traditional age students, 18 to 21 who come as well. I mean, we started out as the College of Lifelong Learning. The goal was just to increase education and access. And so as we've progressed and become more of an online institution that has, greater access, I think, than some other schools, perhaps, because of our 20 years of experience in online. The goal here is to meet people wherever they are. And so while it can sometimes, I think, you get into the classroom and people in your class may have 15 or 20 years of experience in the field, there are other people who, I've had students in like my leadership class who were stay-at-home moms, who I've had people who are just starting their career. And isn't it wonderful that you get to be in a class with people who have experience, you can learn from them? So, I think that the important piece here is always starting with the foundation. Everybody has to start with foundational knowledge. and then building from there. And as Dennis mentioned, he teaches the Introduction to Public Administration course. I also saw Jonathan Kipp, who's here, who has also taught our Introduction to Public Administration course. And the goal of that course is to introduce people to the field, to the history, to the management, to the administration, all of the various pieces, so that when they build on that with other courses, they have that foundation. Dennis, you want to add in?
No, I think that you stated it well. I guess if I back out a little bit to start at the beginning of where we got to this point, I think that when we talk about supporting people who may not have any background, I think we have to do both. There are people who are perhaps younger, who are trying to select an avenue for a career, and then there are people who maybe aren't that young but want to change their career. It's a while back, I had a master's degree in education, and then I got the bug for psychology, so I got an MS in organizational psychology, and it was just because I started to enjoy it, and it had an allure for me. Now I was already employed. I wasn't trying to get a job or anything like that, but for some people, they want to make a change, and something strikes, catches their attention. And if I've been working in the private sector at any kind of successful level, after a while I might say, you know what, I'd like to go into public service. I'd like to do something in my community. And so they're newbies, and I think we do a good job of supporting them, because we try to, I believe that all of us here try to draw out what are the skills and background that you have, and how can that help frame your practice as a public servant. So I think we do support them.
Yeah, I'd also jump in and just say that there's a really, there are always access points, right? So everyone has experience with public organizations, nonprofit organizations, right? So it's a familiar, world, right? What did your, education look like? So did you go to a public school? Great. What did that structure look like? So, the idea of a hierarchical structure and the idea of how government, right? What's your experience at the DMV, right? These are all things that you could always connect students to. But I would say more importantly than that, there is potentially, and I recognize we have lots of public servants online right now, right? There's a bit of a skepticism that grows when you're working in the public sector for, a continued period of time, right? So that early energy that you might have brought to the field and all of that optimism sometimes fades a little bit, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But there is something really quite magical that happens when you have a 22, 23-year-old in the classroom that is full of that optimism, full of that idealism, and is sitting in a group with someone who's been, in the career service for, 15 years. The learning that happens in that moment is quite special, right? And it's not just that 22, 23-year-old learning from, that mid-30s, mid-career professional, right? There's exchange happening, and there's energy flow that's happening, and people are learning from each other. So whether you have all the experience in the world or you're coming at this fresh, you bring a perspective that's worthwhile to this field. And the whole point of our programs is to help you learn, right? Doesn't matter, if you've been in the field for 15 years or not. Our jobs as instructors and, teachers and developers of curriculum is to ensure that all of our students have access and all of our students can learn. So we differentiate that way as well, right? We're always thinking about that. So it actually brings a perfect dynamic to a classroom when you have a mix.
I was laughing, Daniel, when you talked about sort of like the, the bright-eyed bushy-tailed. I remember so many days on the train on the metro in DC with all the interns when it was intern season, and so happy and joyous to be in DC for a little while. And then, you know, they get into the sausage making and in the Congress back rooms, and they're like, oh, what did I get myself into? But to the point about what Dennis was saying about our students and supporting what's something else that has happened probably over the last 6 years is an increase in the interest for public administration. So from the transition from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, now to the Biden administration, we saw like a renewed interest in public service. Also, what we're finding, and this goes back to what you said earlier, Daniel, right from the beginning, was this great resignation that we're seeing. People want to start to do things that are more mission driven, that have a better feel than just making money or just being whatever. So what is happening, I think we're primed both of our programs, both the MPA and our undergraduate and public administration. This great resignation really sets a nice landing pad for those that are thinking about wanting to do something different from whatever they were doing. It's to Dennis's point, if they've been doing something in hospitality or whatever it was for 10, 15 years, they want to change. They want to do something a little bit more, that they're making a change in the world. And that happens with us. That happens with public administration and public service. So that great resignation, I think, is really we're benefiting as educators, I think. But students are also benefiting to be able to come into programs like ours that are thinking about that career change because of post-pandemic and just this era of the great resignation that's happening. I think the timing for us is really, really good for both the changes of our programs and sort of what we offer anyone who's willing and able that wants to come in and make that career change because they're thinking about doing something different and more mission driven, more values driven, and things like that.
It's just super quick to follow up on what Christian's saying, right? There's been a long period of time where, we've kind of had this sense that, millennials in particular were more interested in kind of combining their values with the work that they're doing. And I think a large portion of, more of the social impact business sector took advantage of that to some degree. And that's not to denigrate that. I think, what they're doing is excellent. But the idea of both working for profit and for impact has something that has really energized this, this generation, I would say, a millennial generation. And to Mercedes' earlier point that we should be waving the flag, right? I think that we have and potentially are missing that opportunity, right? And I don't think we should be. The public sector, and I would also include the nonprofit sector, are pretty amazing places to make an impact. And really do speak to those values of the millennial generation that does want to combine both their career with their value sets and make that bigger impact. So yes, social impact for-profit organizations are wonderful, but there is an entire public service, public sector, nonprofit sector that dedicate what they're doing, their lives, to their values. So it's important to remind people of that as well.
On that note, Mercedes is one of the spearheads for a jointly offered graduate and undergraduate certificate, bi-listed, co-listed, I guess we call it, program in nonprofit management. And Dan is absolutely correct. I mean, the skills are very similar. Are there some laws that guide them a little bit differently? Yes, but the people who enter into, for example, working for a community action program are not very much different than people who want to go to work at Health and Human Services, because the only difference is that one's a nonprofit, but both of them are being paid by public dollars. So I think that a lot of the nonprofits are extensions of public service just by virtue of how they're funded. So we offloaded a lot of our public service to nonprofits, which is fine, absolutely fine. I mean, God bless LBJ with his War on Poverty and the community services block grants that put things like CAP that provide Head Start and provide Meals on Wheels and provide fuel assistance, et cetera, et cetera. These are vital services that are done right in the community and they're really important, and they're being provided by nonprofits. But are they public services? They absolutely are, attending to the public good.
Thanks, Dennis. That's a helpful point too. We have another question here from another anonymous attendee. It is a three-parter, so I'll repeat as necessary here. But this is talking about COVID and kind of polarized times. And so the first part of the question is, how has your work shifted to accommodate students, both traditional and non-traditional, studying during the pandemic? Has anything surprised you in supporting students through COVID? And then what successful changes do you think are going to get carried over in terms of program delivery post-pandemic? So what are you doing for students now through the pandemic? What do you anticipate keeping from that process? And that's for all of you.
Yeah, I could jump in quickly on this. And right, so I think there was, I'll kind of address this in general. If I don't hit the exact points, I apologize. I'll try to hit them. But I think there was an immediate reaction as to, okay, how do we just deal with this, in the immediacy, right? So we reacted to that, and often that looked like flipping things online, doing things simultaneously online and in person, right? I mean, this Coffee and Conversations used to meet in person at the law school in Concord. So we're flipping things, right? I think at some point that reaction actually turned into a reflection to figure out how to do this better. So, there are a number of components, right, that you have to deal with the pandemic and students that I'm not going to address, all of them, but mental health comes, front and center, right? Supporting students from that perspective. I'll kind of focus on the academic side of the shop, but I think there's a lot of that other stuff that's essential to doing this well. What I would address is, I think what we learned is that teaching online, and we knew this already, so I don't want to make it sound as if this was simply because of the pandemic, but I think the reaction of the pandemic, I think we forgot this in that switch. Teaching online and teaching in person and teaching simultaneously both online and in person are all three very different animals. And simply assuming that you can do one, the other, or both at the same time perfectly, without thinking about pedagogically how you do that well and what students need, is a mistake. So I think, yes, we reacted. Yes, we did what we had to do for a certain period of time to fulfill our missions and ensure that our students received what they needed. But as we think about what we've learned a good amount about, fatigue from being online for too long. How you create enriching environments from students learning together in an online environment. What aspects of programs might actually work well in person and what don't. So for me, it was a lot about, that online environment, figuring out where we're going to go from here, I think has to do a lot with what we've learned over the past, 16, 18 months of our behavior online. Getting on Zoom and talking right now is commonplace and very easy for most of us, but it also requires a different part of your brain to do that well. And it's exhausting sometimes, right? There are no breaks in between meetings anymore. You go from meeting to meeting to meeting. So to some degree, we're still learning, but I hope that we take these experiences, build on what we've learned, and create academic programs that reflect those experiences.
It was a little bit different for us because we were already an online institution. So it wasn't like we made this huge shift. And for that, I feel very grateful because I feel lucky that we were already in that situation. However, we did make significant shifts. And what we found was prior to the pandemic, students were not willing or interested in having classes in more of an online hybrid where they actually met in person. We were completely online asynchronous. So there was no real person-to-person personal touch point that was happening in the classroom. And what we discovered is through the pandemic, when students started to struggle, and especially the mental health piece was a concern, faculty started to offer these optional Zoom sessions, and all the students would show up. And so we started to offer two different kind of types of classes. One, which was this online hybrid where they meet every other week and it's actually scheduled in there. Other faculty have just continued to do this optional Zoom sessions that they offer nearly every week, and students keep showing up. And so that came as a huge surprise to us, whereas before students didn't do that. And I think that it was in part because of how comfortable they felt being on Zoom, being in this online virtual environment where we're talking to each other, feeling like that wasn't the equivalent of being in the classroom. Now, when we offered classes in our actual classrooms in the fall, we didn't have any enrollment. All the enrollment was with the online hybrids. So this was super interesting for us, and definitely some lessons learned. Some other challenges that we've seen is many people have dropped out of school due to the pandemic. And part of that was in part because of the way that the administration created, the setup with the loans, that students don't have to pay back their loans because of the pandemic and hardship. So consequently, that meant that people didn't have to stay in school to put their loans off. So there's an interesting policy piece that affected our enrollment. But other pieces of this were, working mothers ended up staying home and dropping out of school. We had many working moms drop out, at least for the time being, to take care of their families. We had a lot of public servants, specifically, fire, but I think also police, National Guard, who, were activated and so had to pull out of classes, or our faculty have had to be very, very flexible in understanding people's unique needs. And I mean, I taught a whole class of fire service professionals, and in that class, I mean, there were just weeks that I just had to be understanding, like, things happen and you just you got to go with the flow, because it's a challenging time. And I think that understanding of people and their unique needs is going to continue. And we're going to definitely continue to offer the online hybrids, because what we realize is people were yearning to make meaningful connections, and you can do that in the online environment.
I think, what I was going to say was your last one was just being more empathetic to students, right? It's different when, a hurricane hits Louisiana. That small group of population is hurt. There's an earthquake in California. That small group. This was all of us. We were all under duress. So there was this understanding that the problems that you're going through is the same problems that I'm going through, or what have you, right? If it was an unemployment situation, or a sick parent, or a sick child, or whatever it was, all of us were in the same bucket together. So to Mercedes' point, if someone was deployed, I had a cousin that was deployed because in the National Guard, they were giving shots, or they were going, whatever it was, when the vaccine came out, those sorts of things, like all that gave us sort of a level of understanding, like we are all in this sort of together. And we need to be mindful of the work-life imbalance, or the work-life challenges, or whatever that's happening in their lives that's happening with us. So that flexibility, I think we all took that sort of great pause and sort of that great breath, right, as we all sort of stayed home for months on end. But I really, really think that there was a better connection from faculty to student, where it wasn't as transactional as it may have been in the past, just sort of like going through the motions of educating and stuff, that there was now a step back and say, okay, your life has to also be brought into this classroom. So if you are deployed, if you are sick, if you have to drop out because you are unemployed, or you're a single mother that can't anymore, an understanding happened. And I hope that doesn't end. So to answer question number 3, I hope that our faculty never stop that mentality. We definitely won't. We'll always sort of be advocate for that. I don't ever want that to change moving forward. Like, that has to be part of our DNA as faculty members, to understand there's something else happening in that student's life behind that screen or in that classroom that we don't know about. It, since we were all in that same boat together, we understood because we were all under that duress.
Yeah, I want to just hit on that point. I think it's such an important point. You know, sometimes when people think about master's or bachelor's degrees in professional fields, they think of them as lesser quality programs. And, you know, they're not, right? By any means, they're not. They are equally as high quality. I think there's simply an acknowledgement that there's something else happening outside of the program, right? That these are geared towards an external goal that might be specific, but in that we take in students that have lives. And we as faculty in professionally based programs need to acknowledge that those lives are happening, that this is not an ivory tower mentality, that our students are balancing families, work, you know, intense work. And faculty and instructors in those programs need to be willing to allow them to balance those demands, because otherwise we're not creating accessible nor attainable goals for our students. It's impossible to do everything perfectly. And I truly think that is the heart and soul of professionally based programs. We acknowledge that there's more going on beyond the program itself.
And one of the things that strikes me from this recent conversation, where it's heading, is yes, students had to make an adjustment, and yes, we have to be empathetic, but there are as many teachers who were not prepared to shift to a different style, and they were uncomfortable with it, and sometimes it wasn't pretty, and they weren't necessarily happy with it. And I'm not certain. I think with the institutions that are represented here today, I think that we did a pretty good job of helping teachers get to where they needed to be. On the other hand, I don't think that's the case everywhere. And as we all know, most higher ed, you know, with some exceptions, most higher ed is provided by adjunct faculty who are, you know, working somewhere else or what have you. And if they are, they may have a wonderful knowledge base, they may be wonderful teachers, but they know they have a style, and it's hard for them to break out of that style. And so they could be uncomfortable. And so it just, when we started talking about the sort of that comfort level, I wonder if many schools have paid attention to the fact that there's no switch to flip for the faculty either. That they need some help in figuring out what are best practices, you know, and some of them just aren't comfortable with it. And I think that we've probably lost some faculty members across the country. I don't mean here locally necessarily, but across the country. I know there are people who have a more traditional view of what a class is supposed to look like. And when the lights went out, so to speak, and we had to switch very quickly to online delivery, some of them just weren't prepared for it and didn't like it, or it was daunting. And I wouldn't doubt that we lost some very talented people by having to make that switch.
Yeah, thank you all. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point, and you know, making educational accessible to everyone, and you know, having different styles, right? Like in-person works better for some people, online works better for some people. The folks that need continuing education, I'm sure that's going to be something that's going to keep on being a topic of conversation, you know, as we sort of go through the different waves of the pandemic and moving on into the future. I'd like to shift gears a little bit here as we've got just about 10 minutes left, and just kind of ask a little bit more philosophical question, just for folks that may be interested in thinking about getting a public administration degree or continuing their education. What makes a good public administrator? Why should someone get into this field or continue their education in this field?
I'll jump in. So, my take is, public administrators, they need to weather a number of storms. And that's challenging, right? And we've titled this, managing or whatever it is, public service in polarizing times. Public administrators don't necessarily have a choice who their boss is, right? And their boss may be, partisan, on one side or the other. A public administrator has a job to do, and they have to be able to do that, regardless of, what's going on around them. And to some degree, that was how I introduced, how I see the field of public administration, right? It's mission driven in a heightened political environment. That heightened political environment varies, throughout the years, the decades, et cetera. And a public administrator's job is to be that steady hand. There's a lot of talk and a lot of conversation around what we would call the fourth branch of government, right? Which is essentially the bureaucracy, quote unquote. And it's typically thrown out there with a relatively pejorative tone associated with it. But a vast majority of our public sector employees are public service minded, mission driven, right? And they've chosen this career because they see it more as a calling than they do anything else. Now, does that mean that they're perfect? No. Does it mean they don't make mistakes? No. But I think what it means is that they're there to do a job. They believe in that job, and they often, try to follow that mission to the best of their ability. So to me, a good public administrator is mission driven. They're steady handed, and they're in this for the right reasons, which means that they want to serve the public, who essentially, are their bosses at some point or another along that chain of command.
It strikes me, just following up with Dan's comment about, we all have, anyone in public service have people to report to. I think probably one of the most difficult jobs in public service is a town manager or a city manager. If you're a town manager in the state of New Hampshire, you work for a select board who are on a rotating basis elected. All it takes is one election cycle to shift the whole tone and direction of that board, of that select board. And I noticed that one of our people in one of our attendees is town manager in Francistown, and I don't know if I can ask him to speak up, but I think that if you have a select board that keeps on turning over, that makes your job kind of precarious. And I wonder if that creates any kind, I don't know, anxiety might be the wrong word, but maybe it's the right word. So I'm going to see if I can yell out to Jamie Pike to speak up. Can you do that, Jamie? There he is. What do you think, Jamie? Is that a difficult thing, serving a select board that constantly turns over, or constantly, yearly turns over? No?
I don't know if non-panelists could jump in at this point.
Yeah, I allowed Jamie you to speak, but I'm not sure. It looks like your mute's off, but we're not hearing you.
Yeah, I'll just quick follow up on that. I mean, there are city and town managers that are on annual contracts, right? Yep. I mean, so year after year after year, those contracts are getting renewed. And to Dennis's point, right, you may have a new select board, every couple of years switching out. So that's a feat, right? And we have, town managers, some, I won't name them, that have been doing this for 15, 20 years in that same, city or town. So it is really quite an amazing feat to be able to weather those political changes and stay consistent and strong in what you're doing. And Christian, I think I cut you off, so I'm going to stop there.
Oh yeah, I was just going to sort of continuing what you were going on with this, my lens on the federal level, working with careerists at Department of Labor and a Department of Education. This job is not for the faint of heart. You must have an exceptional amount of adaptability and flexibility, to exactly what Daniel said. So some of these careers that have worked for 20 years, I've seen administrators change. You know, I've talked to them about it, like, are you okay with it? And I've done this before. It's okay. But to have that mentality, like this could break someone because of that transition, because of that, you know, a new lock, really, like a new message, a new everything. To not be able to do that, that's, you have to be able to have that. You have to be able to have that adaptability and flexibility in your mind, in your mindset, to be able to do this kind of job for exactly the reason that Daniel's talking about. You don't know who your boss is going to be when your boss changes, maybe every year, every 4 years, whatever. You have to be able to keep that, why you took that job in the first place. You took this to serve the public. You took this to help. So that calling that we're talking about is real. And every single political that I've talked to, every single careerist that I've talked to, not the politicals, every careerist I've talked to, that's exactly what the mindset is. It's okay. We'll weather the storm. I know why I'm here. I know what we're doing. I know what we're about. I know what this agency is about. And I don't care who my boss is. I'm going to continue to show up and do the work that I want to do to help serve the public. That is the mentality of a public servant. And that has to be the mentality of a public servant.
I also think we have to acknowledge that public administration, public service is like, it's like everything under the sun, you know, it covers so much. I mean, yes, it is a field, and yes, it is worth studying. However, there's so much variability in what people can do in the public sector, which is amazing. That's one of the things that makes it so cool, is that there is so much variability within the field. And consequently, I think, in addition to what all of you have said, because all of that is also true, is that what this comes down to is we have to build leaders, and we're enhancing leaders. We're helping them build their internal compass, both ethically, but also in terms of, you know, decision-making processes, working with people, managing people, dealing with people, conflict resolution, all of these pieces, change management. People have to learn how to be savvy in ever-changing times, no matter which area of the public sector they choose to be in. And so consequently, I mean, it's what this comes down to, at least from our perspective, I think, is that really that this is a leadership degree. We're building people to help them learn how to be leaders and managers, no matter what area of the public sector they choose to be in, which is why one of the coolest things about the classes we offer is just the variability in students that we have, with all different backgrounds from all different areas of the public sector, who bring very different stories and experiences. It's neat.
There's an author, a scholar named Stephen Lipsky, and he wrote a book, and, you know, our students read this, one of the chapters in the book. It's called Street Level Bureaucrats. And essentially what Lipsky writes about is the fact that street level bureaucrats hold a key to our Constitution and to democracy. That most people interact with government on a very basic level. Whether it is being, you know, pulled over by an officer for speeding, you know, on the highway, or interacting at the, you know, Department of Motor Vehicle, or whatever it might be, right? Or, you know, maybe it's the person who picks up your trash on a Tuesday morning, right? That's your experience with government. And it is essential that that person is able to acknowledge that they do hold this key to our quote unquote Constitution or to our democracy, because they are the most accessible person that we have as community members, as individuals that live in towns and cities, and you know, citizens of this country. So I think that is also part of what it means to be a public administrator, is just acknowledging that power, because you do have power, and being able to engage with the community in such a way that you know, is open to that community and accessible to that community.
Thanks, Dan. Well, we're at 9:29 here, so we are right at the end of our time. I just want to thank thank you all, Christian, Dan, Dennis, Mercedes. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about public administration this morning. I know I learned a lot. I hope folks did too, whether they're watching live or the recorded version. Just thanks so much. Appreciate you being here. On a personal note, this is actually my final Coffee and Conversations. I'm leaving the Carsey School. For folks that have been attending on a regular basis, just want to say thanks. Have really appreciated having you all with us. Hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday and the rest of their week, and we'll see you all again soon.
Not that fast. I mean, we need to acknowledge Jordan a little bit more than that. So to be clear, just for everyone who's still with us, Jordan was hired at Carsey as a policy analyst. Jordan is a policy analyst, and Jordan took this on out of the kindness of his heart. He wasn't hired to be the MC of anything or the host of Coffee and Conversations. So not only did he take on the hosting job, but he helps organize it. He helps bring in our speakers. He works with Dennis and Frank and Robin, who are also here with us, to pull this off. So Jordan, just on behalf of the Carsey School, we want to say, thank you so much. You certainly will be missed for any number of things that you do, but this has been such an amazing thing that you've taken on and really bringing this community together. So thank you for all the work that you've done. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ditto.
And Dan, if I can add, Jordan, from the BET perspective, Jordan, you've done a fantastic job and really appreciate all your help. You've been fantastic to work with. Very hard to replace.
You will not be replaced.
That's true, but you did a great job. And we really appreciate it at BET and of course the Alumni Association. So thank you.
Thank you.
Terrific. Jordan, you are, in my books, you are the chief cat herder. You've proven yourself to be able to herd all these cats very, very well. When we're all in a panic, you get us all together. I know that, I don't know how many times I send you a thing in an email saying, I don't have the link, or I don't, whatever. And you're always calm and patient, and I'm less deserving of that calm and patience, but thank you very much.
Thank you all. It's very kind. It has been a blast. I have loved it. I love public policy. It's why I took this job. I love getting to talk policy with people every month. It's a blast. Appreciate you all.
Thank you, Jordan, for everything.
Thank you very much, Jordan.
Thanks, everybody.
Be well.
Be safe.
You too. Bye, everyone.